Today on History's Tech, we are looking at a tank that made up 1/4 of all British produced tanks during World War II, the Valentine tank. With over 8,000 produced, 11 different marks in the series, and an additional 12 different variants, and even a few different tanks based off of its chassis, the Valentine tank is a rather unique approach to tank development by the British. And while it served as a mainline tank for the British for only 4 years, it actually would serve around the world up until the 1960s. But let's go ahead and look at this rather unique variant of an infantry tank that actually has an incredible service history. Now, the Valentine is a continuation of the British's idea on infantry and cruiser tanks. Now, again, I won't go into super detail about this, but basically, an infantry tank is designed to be a slightly heavier tank designed to support troops in a direct fire system versus a cruiser tank, which is designed to be fast and maneuverable and get behind enemy lines and shut off supply lines. Now, the main infantry tank for the British during World War II, at least in the start, was the Matilda I and then later the Matilda II. However, these tanks, while pretty easy to produce and relatively cheap, the British wanted still an even faster, cheaper tank to produce, so they began developing a whole new tank. But they actually went in an unusual direction for an infantry tank. So Vickers Armstrong planned to utilize tanks that they had experience with in the development of this new tank. So they actually took two cruiser tanks, the A9 and the A10. They liked the lower weight, the speed that these tanks had, the better suspension and transmissions, but they wanted to combine it with the greater armor of an infantry tank like that of the A11, also known as the Matilda I. Now, by combining all this together, they came up with an entirely new design known as the Valentine. Now, the Valentine incorporated many of the features that were kind of a crossbreed between the cruiser and the infantry tank. It had the 2-pounder gun that would be more common on a cruiser. It had a lower silhouette designed to be as light as possible, very similar to a cruiser. It was very compact, it had a cramped interior. Its armor was a little bit weaker than that of the Matilda II, but it still had the same top speed. Now, while it couldn't be comparative exactly to the Matilda II, it was much easier to produce because it used a lot of components already available from the A9 and the A10 and was much less expensive to produce than the Matilda II. Now, a rather interesting fact of this is during the development of this tank, basically the war was starting to happen. There was major conflict going on in France, and they put the tank into trials and they kind of rushed it through trials, mainly because it was actually pretty successful in trials and there was a need for new, easier to produce tanks already at the start of the war. So they went ahead and started ordering full-blown production of the tank. And in fact, from there, it's actually going to take on a dual role. While it is technically an infantry tank, it's going to be deployed in North Africa with cruiser units. And it's in North Africa that the Valentine really begins to cut its teeth. Now, the Valentine is actually deployed with the British in North Africa in December of 1941, and it gets this reputation as being this incredibly reliable, well-protected tank. It does a really good job replacing the Matilda II that it was designed to replace, and it really shows that it has versatility as it replaces even the cruiser Mark IIs because there weren't enough cruiser tanks, and it's able to actually fill in the role of a cruiser tank during this conflict. And partially this is due to the fact that they deploy the Valentine IIs, which were better suited for desert warfare. Now, as good as the Valentine was in North Africa, it would become the victim of pretty much every other tank during this time period, and that it's basically tank development went faster than most armies could keep up with. The 2-pound gun that was equipped on the Valentine just couldn't be useful as an anti-tank weapon anymore, and they really needed something bigger and more powerful. And it would actually take a while before they started adding better guns like a 6-pound cannon and the 75 millimeter gun that would be developed for it. In the European theater, especially like that of Northwestern Europe, it would actually be pretty much phased out by 1944, being replaced by the Churchill tank, another infantry tank that was kind of a mixture between a cruiser and an infantry tank, and the M4 Sherman. However, outside of North Africa and Northwestern Europe, it would find service in other locations like that of the Pacific, where the New Zealanders really took it in. They modified it just like they did the Matilda II, started bringing in better, heavier shells for it, actually equipped it with a 3-inch howitzer to make it a tank buster, essentially, and it really served as a very well light tank for the New Zealand forces. So much so that New Zealand would continue to use it as a tank until the 1960s. And it would see a lot of service with the Soviet Union. where basically every variant except for the Mark One was deployed with the Soviet Union as an aid tank. Um, it was in multiple conflicts for the Soviet Union. It was there at the Battle of Moscow. It was there to the end of the war. But the Soviets liked to use it as a second line tank, mainly because they didn't like the speed and the fact that it had that 2 pound gun. However, they liked that it was small, it was reliable, and had really good armor. Now, of course, it wasn't made for the Russian winter, so there were some issues with that. But overall, the Soviets really liked it, and they found it as a good companion tank to the T 34. Interestingly, a portion of these ex Soviet Lend Lease Valentines would actually end up in the hands of some of their allies and others that they were trying to at least be friendly with when trying to provide them with armor. Now, the Valentine went through a lot of variations. There are 11 different Mark series of the Valentine tanks, with the most common variation between all of these being essentially armor and engines. And this just went by who was manufacturing them, where they were getting parts from, things like that. Now, the finals in the series, the Mark 9 and Mark 11 especially, basically had taken larger engines and even bigger guns, hoping to be able to keep up with the ever growing and changing armor that was occurring with tank development during World War II. However, this proved to be a futile effort and they ended up just replacing the tank anyway. Now, there are quite a few variants. My personal favorite is this one right here, the Valentine DD. And the DD, of course, stands for duplex drive. This was designed to be an amphibious tank. Most of this equipment would be outfitted to Shermans, but there were a few Valentines designed to utilize this equipment. Now, additionally, there are the common variants. We have the bridge laying, the anti-tank mounting, the flamethrower tanks that were all very common at the time. There was even flame mortars. There was one known as the Burmark, which was basically going to be a ramp tank. There was even one called the gas jumping tank, which was because of the light weight of the Valentine, they had this idea to basically attach rockets to it to allow it to propel itself across obstacles such as minefields. Additionally, 3 entirely new tanks were built off of the Valentine chassis. The most successful of these was the Archer, which was basically a tank destroyer with a 17-pound gun. And this tank was actually so successful it saw service until the 1950s. The next tank, which anybody who's ever played a online war game like War Thunder or World of Tanks has probably seen this one, and that's the Bishop. The Bishop was a self-propelled artillery piece, hoping to be able to provide mobile artillery out in the battlefield. However, only about 150 of these were actually built. They were not very successful due to being rushed into production, and better designs ended up replacing them. And this is followed up by the least successful design, the Valiant. This was basically going to be a light medium tank designed to fight Japanese forces, and the whole thing was found to be problematic and was abandoned as a failure. Now, even with 8,000 of these tanks produced, there's only around 40 of them still in existence, and only a handful of those are in any type of working order. And if you'd like to visit one, go ahead and check out the Tank Museum. They're going to be your best option for that. But there you have it, a look at the Valentine tank, and tank with 8,000 produced, but really only had a really short career due to being replaced by other tanks such as the Churchill and the M4 Sherman, but it really had an impressive career, went through a lot of variations, and had a really good service life. Unfortunately, it was the beginning of the end of that whole cruiser and infantry tank and really showed the need for a more unified tank system that's going to lead the British to developing the main battle tank in the future. But that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.